Hi. I've been told I was a little harsh about the bank manager of Eastcote Branch and his wife, who invited me to their house for sherry and ham sandwiches. I was probably looking at this through the eyes of a 17-year-old, and at that time it wasn't really where I wanted to be. But if the same thing happened now, I might be a little bit kinder. Anyway, eventually I left the bank in March and I went to work in Tottenham Cemetery. I was planning to finish my education, but the college didn't start until September, and the local authority employed a lot of people, students mainly, in the summertime to make up for the extra work caused during the summer, say cutting the grass, pruning the bushes, that kind of thing. And also at the Tottenham Cemetery I earned £15 a week, which was quite a step up from the £8 or £9 I was earning in the bank. It was also a very different atmosphere, and I learned a lot there about gardening, especially about pruning roses, because I spent about the first 2 months pruning roses in the Garden of Remembrance, and I ruined my newly acquired leather jacket pruning these roses, catching it on the thorns and tearing the leather. But the weather improved, and gradually things got better. One of the things I did was get a motorcycle to help me to commute from my home in northwest London to Tottenham, and I rode it every day. Mostly it was successful, and it lasted quite a while. I think on one occasion I rode it in March through a freezing rainstorm, and I couldn't afford the kind of rainwear that you need to keep yourself dry and warm on a motorcycle, so I wasn't wearing the right clothes. When I got to the cemetery, I was fixed in that sort of motorcycle position, I couldn't move my arms or legs, and the guys that were there, they took pity on me, and they said, "You better stay here in the canteen, sit by the fire and get dry. You're not in a fit state to work today." And thank you very much. I wasn't. The motorcycle worked fine for a while, but then eventually the inevitable happened and it broke down, and I didn't have the tools or the ability to repair it. So my good friend Terry and his mum, no doubt, allowed me to stay at their place, which was a good bit nearer the cemetery, and I was able to get the bus from there in the morning. I will eternally be grateful for that, Terry. Thank you very much. Anyway, as I say, the weather got better, and my good friend Andy probably saw that I was having a reasonably good time and earning reasonably good money, and decided to join me. And when he came, I think he set a new low bar in the performance stakes. I mean, we were there, but I call him a friend. He was more of an accomplice, really, because you know what I'm saying, Andy. We were a very bad influence on each other then, and we probably still are. And we spent a lot of time not doing anything very much. I think on one occasion we got the working day down to 45 minutes of actual work, and 6.5 hours of doing absolutely nothing really, and well, we were bad, but it wasn't. It was easy to be so slack in this place. I mean, that was the norm, the working norm of in those days. To give you an example, there was another man there called Burma who I've spoken about before in my previous videos, and he was affected by his war service in Burma, from which nobody ever seemed to recover. Many people were damaged by that. Anyway, one day the time and motion people turned up, started with their clipboards and their watches, timing everything, how long it takes to cut so many yards of grass, or how long it takes to prune a rose bush. And Les, Burma, as we called him, he was, well, he normally did very little, I mean, apart from biddling around with a broom all day. And but when these people came with their clipboards, he thought, oh, I'm being tested. So he started doing everything on the double, sweeping, cutting grass, pruning, until the rest of the people that were employed there said, hold up, Les, slow down. If you do it this speed now, if you do it double time now, they're going to expect you to do it the same speed every time, and we're all going to suffer. Just slow down, don't hurry, just do your work at your normal pace if need be, or even slower if possible. So he kind of slowed down. But they were right, of course, because physical work, you can't just do it flat out. I mean, people aren't machines. They didn't have machines doing that work then. It was all done by hand, and people need a rest now and again. You can't just carry on working non-stop. These guys with their clipboards and their watches, they didn't know about physical work. They worked in an office. They thought we were just machines, but we're not. Anyway, it's grave digging, for example, can be quite a skilled job. There was one man appropriately named Johnny Ditchman, who he was a giant of a man. He was tall and broad, and he was very skilled with a shovel. He could dig a hole, and you can't just dig a hole with make a mess. You've got to have nice, clean, straight edges, and you've got to pile this spoil up neatly at the side of the grave. And people don't want to come and put their loved one into some muddy hole. They want a nice, neat grave, and Johnny could do that. He was skilled with the shovel. A rare skill these days, actually, but he was. Aside from Burma and Johnny, there were a number of other people there. Two come to mind, in fact, men who had seen war service and had stories to tell about that. One of them was a guy whose name I can't remember, but he had been a stoker in a freighter, the merchant navy, on the North Atlantic run, delivering jeeps to Murmansk or something like that. And as a stoker, of course, if you were hit by a torpedo, which could happen any minute, you wouldn't have very much chance of surviving. You're down in the bowels of the ship goes down, you go down with it into that freezing water. And I think he acquired a couple of habits in his career, stoking. You'd see him far off in a field somewhere, leaning on his shovel, and he was bent double all the time. He bent over. He must have acquired that stoking the freighter. And he was also smoking. He used to smoke about 100 cigarettes a day. He smoked all night as well, apparently. And no wonder he couldn't sleep, and he felt a little bit jumpy and smoked a lot because, well, he'd worked on a freighter. But people were compassionate about that. He'd done his bit, that's for sure. Another man who worked there hated Montgomery. The reason was that he was at the Battle of Alamein, and Montgomery had set up a little line of telegraph poles stuck in the sand about half a mile in front of the real British guns. And when the barrage started, him and his mates had to run up and down throwing firecrackers and smoke bombs and things to convince the Germans that they were the actual guns. And so they had to run up and down with these shells, the German shells, raining on them from above, while the British guns were firing over their head at the Germans. He never forgave Montgomery for that, and I don't blame him. He was in a very tight spot. Another man that worked there, I don't know about his war service, but there's a man called Charlie Clark, and everybody called Clark gets called Charlie Clark. I don't know why. Maybe it was his name. I think it was the brother-in-law of the foreman. But his job, part of his job was looking after the chapel. And to perform his job, he had to wear a suit. He had a suit for it, which he put on working days. And his job was to take people's ashes and distribute them on the plot of land they set aside for distributing ashes, in the Garden of Rest, the Garden of Remembrance, beg your pardon. Should be called the Garden of Forgetting, but there you go. And for that job, he had a special little dispenser. Put the ashes in it, and you pulled the trigger on the top, and the bottom opened up, and the ashes came out. And so he, the relatives of the loved one could watch their relative being dropped on the earth. They have a little concrete, little cube of concrete with a bronze plaque on it saying the person's name and their date of birth and death. And then when the ashes had been poured, they'd plant a rose bush there. Hence there were hundreds, maybe even thousands of rose bushes. But anyway, one day Charlie Clark, let me explain. I was taking the sit-on mower back into the shed, and in order to do that, there was a little concrete step you had to get over. So you had to rev the mower up to get over this concrete step. And one day Charlie Clark had come to collect his special little ash dispenser, which he kept at the back of the shed where I was trying to get my mower in. And being an officious person as he was, he walked straight in front of me into the shed. And just as he walked in, the mower kind of gripped and jumped over this lip of this step and charged down towards the end of the shed. And Charlie Clark was left looking me in the face. He straddled the mower, looking me in the face, with the lawnmower sort of whirring underneath him. It was a tricky moment. He could have been minced, but there was nothing he could say. It was his own fault for walking in front of me. They, you'd think being a cemetery there would be a lot of sorrow and grief around, and it's like it didn't really affect us people who worked there. It was irrelevant to us. I mean, mostly I suppose people being buried or their ashes being spread, we didn't know them anyway, and they were old. But one there was one funeral that did move me, and that was when they buried I think it was a 10-year-old girl, and many people turned out for that funeral and stood around the grave and watched that little coffin being lowered. And the grief was tangible. I felt it, everyone felt it. You could see it. It was very sad, and it really did move me, and it was the one funeral that actually had an effect on me emotionally. So, anyway, all things come to an end. Eventually we had to give up, move on, take our tans elsewhere. We had tanned arms and tanned faces. We didn't have tanned bodies because you couldn't really take your shirt off in the cemetery, but anyway, we had to move on. So that was the end of the cemetery for us. And I dedicate this video to my good friends Andrew and Terry. Although we are living far apart now, when we do get together, we go right back there to that age in our lives when everything is hysterically funny, and we were having a good time. So if you're out there, Terry and Andy, hi. I'll see you all later. Bye bye.